I just want to start everybody off with a good piece of luck. I just want to say, have you say hi to Sharon, the HWA Crow. Expensive, some production value. So he's like, good luck, everybody. Have a great day. Okay. I'm a writer, not an actor, but you get the idea.
As the crow flies, it'll be great.
There you go.
There you go. I'm going to fangirl for a minute. I am so excited to see Sarah. I like to finally be on a panel with her. I've been Facebook stalking her forever. Seriously, Facebook stalking her and hooping and hollering about her awards and act. I was like, yeah, I love this book. Okay, sorry. All right, I'm done. I'm done.
I love you so much.
I was like, oh my God, I'm on a panel with Sarah. Okay, I'm all right.
Everybody looks really nice tonight. Everybody looks nice tonight.
Yeah, what time is it for you, Violet?
Yeah. It's almost 1.
Oh my gosh, thank you for doing this.
That's why I'm zoned out. I'm like, hi everybody.
Wow.
But I know I'll be so pumped after. I'll be like, how do I go to sleep now?
Yeah.
I hope you don't have to wake up tomorrow for anything specific.
No.
Okay, good.
No, we're still in lockdown here in the UK, so they ain't nowhere to go.
Hopefully you'll be allowed to sleep in.
Yes, there's nowhere else to go in this country except the grocery store.
Right.
Wow.
I'm Saturday librarian in the morning.
Wait, what? You have what?
I get to be the Saturday librarian in the morning.
Saturday librarian. Oh, I've done that many, many times. You're not tomorrow, are you? Because you're no, yeah.
What's that?
I've been that one many times.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a great story about that. So my first day as Saturday librarian at my library, the Berwyn Library, for the public library, for those of you who know, it was one of those things, literally it was my first Saturday, and the administrator in charge, when you're a librarian, when you have your degree, you immediately become a supervisor, but you don't necessarily become the librarian in charge. The librarian in charge went to lunch, and she came to my desk and she said, Becky, you are in charge for the next hour. I'm like, wait, what? I've been here a week. She's like, you're in charge for the next hour. It'll be fine. Sarah, what do you think happened?
It was not fine.
Somebody fell and started bleeding. There were 4 accident reports. She wanted the ambulance.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. You should have marched over and locked the door after that woman.
Whenever I was giving a reference shift, I would use it as an excuse for collection development.
But you'd be like, I gotta go be on the computer and not talk to anybody.
Yeah. Oh, I'd do it right there. I'd order Motorhead for the kids,
Wow.
Like, hey, you wanted to be hip. You wanted some circulation here.
Yeah, that'll circulate. People are coming in. Thank you to everybody who's coming in. Oh, I see my friend Rebecca. She's a librarian. You can all use the chat, everyone coming in. And I will be monitoring it. We're going to start at the top of the hour. We have questions already, but if you have anything, thanks for introducing yourselves. Yeah, keep doing that. Heidi just introduced herself. And what you can do is, if you put in some questions, if I have time, I'll get to them, but I just don't think I will. But we had a great chat. Those of you who were at the last panel with 2 weeks ago with Gwendolyn, we had a great conversation going. So feel free to be conversing with each other about what people are saying. There's some fun questions where we talk about authors and things that we like and other people were sharing. So that's really fun. So please do that. And we're just chatting until we start. So while we have some of you captive, I better go post. You can go watch Cynthia. What is it, next week, Cynthia?
Yes, next.
I should post that.
Thursday.
There's another free event with her with the Chicago Public Library. It is the first event for the Chicago, sponsored by the Chicago chapter of the Horror Writers Association. So we revamped, and I'm going to post it. I'm just pulling it up. It's free. You can watch it on their YouTube page. You don't have to be a patron.
And I absolutely love Ashley.
Oh, Mark.
Oh.
Hi, Mark Matthews.
Mark told me he might be here. This is that's the event with Cynthia. I love Ashley too, Cynthia. You did Librarians Day. She did the one. Danielle's not going to be here tonight, but she did the one. She moderated for me and Sadie and Danielle to talk about horror reviewing.
Okay.
Nice.
She's one of my favorite people.
So great. Like I want to talk about this already. So
that's her.
Yeah.
She's also loves to cook. So if you want to trade recipes with her.
Yeah.
Nice.
I need easy recipes for like small people, for little people. What's easy? What can I just throw together and just say, here?
Yeah, I know. Especially with everybody at home all the time. I know.
Yeah.
Although my son has learned how to make food for himself because I'm like, I'm done, dude. Like, well, he's 15. So, but like, he's the baby, right? So other people always made food for him, like his sister, but she's in college now. So.
Oh, yeah.
Figure it out. You know, right, Nicole, with all the
I do.
ones,
My two older ones at college and my younger one is home. And yes, the babies left at home.
We got about 3 more minutes. So, and we're going to make sure that we've got it going on Facebook before we start, everyone. So, ooh, somebody's from Coachella Valley. Ooh, that sounds fancy. I'm just happy to be in Chicago where it's been above freezing for more than 2 days, right, Cynthia?
It's 45 on Sunday, and I'm so excited. We're going to go for a drive along the lakefront. Like 45 is summer for me right now.
Sarah, are you
living
warm?
in Chicago?
Wait, what, Nicole?
So I miss living in Chicago.
Oh, yeah. It's a nice place. I'm a transplant, but I like it. Sarah, is it warmer by you too? Or is it not up there yet?
It's starting to. The snow on the median has melted enough I can see over it now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think. By Wisconsin standards.
Oh my goodness.
I just want to take a quick note that Ashley, I'm super jealous of your Overlook Hotel background.
I know, I commented too.
Good one.
I just expect to see the twins around the corner.
I was worried when she
Yes.
moved her head before, but.
Oh, God.
Plus, we got Alma made everyone else go in another room. Cynthia's hiding from her family. I sent all of them another side. Violet's family's asleep.
Everybody is asleep.
Sarah's told hers to go in the basement.
That's where the video games are. They're fine.
Yes, that's my son, I think, is playing video games right now also.
My 15-year-old is probably still playing video games as well.
Oh my goodness.
He's probably still up. I'm like, eh.
Yeah, I know, right? It's Friday. Like, what are you going to say?
It's
you know?
Friday, and also because there's no school here, that's the only way he has any contact with his friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did that we started letting him play a lot more video games, my son, last spring. To be with his friends. He goes a couple days a week though, so, and then he's virtual the others, so. All right, we got another minute or so. Thanks everybody for coming in. Feel free to introduce yourself. Use the chat. We did get word from Danielle that she's not joining us, but everybody else is here. Please use the chat. You can talk to each other. I cannot promise that I will take any questions from the chat because we have a list of questions and we're trying to keep the 2 panels fairly similar so that the experience is similar. Hi, Megan. Thanks for saying hi. Oh, Sarah's here too. Some people who were here last time because I was in the chat last time. I was the one in the chat. So Catherine already put a question in to discuss their works in progress. We are going to talk about that right away. But she does also want you to say, when we get to that first question, maybe if the pandemic has affected your writing habits at all. So if you want to bring that up in our first question. So yes, we are going to be getting to that. that. All right, whenever you are ready, Ashley, you tell us. Okay, we're ready? Okay, and we're live on Facebook too, so great. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is the Females of Fright, Women in Horror Month, Horror Writers Association panel. This is part 2. So if you'd like to see part 1, we had different authors and Gwendolyn Keist was our moderator, and that is already up on the Horror Writers Association YouTube page, so you can watch that. My name is Becky Spratford. I am the secretary of the Horror Writers Association. I'm also the author of the Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror for Librarians. It's by ALA Editions. And we have a great group of women here tonight to talk about being women in horror. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by asking everybody to do a quick introduction of themselves. And I'm going to call on people and we're going to go around and we're going to change up the order. Please, again, remind people, we'd love those of you on Zoom in the chat to use the reaction. On Facebook, you can also do reactions so we can have conversations among those of us who aren't present with each other, but we're all here virtually. And Nicole is going to go first. So quick introduction of yourself and what you're working on and what you have out.
So my name is Nicole Gibbons Kurtz, and I am one of the 6 recipients of the Horror Writers Association's diversity grant this year. I'm currently working on my fantasy mystery series set in the Kingdom of Avis. So everyone in the kingdom are hawks, are birds. So my primary protagonist is a hawk who does investigative work for the Order. It's kind of like Criminal Minds meets winged fairy magic, matriarchal system, murders thing. There's nothing quite like it, and so I really love it. I'm also outlining right now a Weird Western novel. Most of my Weird Westerns tend to skew horror-ish, so I'm actually working on that as well.
Thank you, Nicole. I love Weird Westerns too, but your novel sounds fantastic. Alma, you're up next.
Hi, well, I was glad to hear of a Weird Western. I'm Alma Katsu. I've written 5 novels. Most of them have elements of historical, horror, supernatural, that sort of thing. My most recent one was The Deep, which just came out in paperback, which is a reimagining of the sinking of the Titanic and the sister ship Britannic with a horror twist. And pretty soon I actually have my first non-horror-ish novel coming out in a month, Red Widow, which is a spy thriller. And I wrote it after having a whole career at CIA.
Thank you, Alma. Cynthia, you're up next to let us know the introduction of yourself.
Sure. I am Cynthia Pelayo. I am now a 2-time Bram Stoker Award nominated author.
Yay!
So excited for Into the Forest and All the Way Through, which is a true crime poetry collection, and I Need to Believe, which is an essay on my exploration of spirituality. I recently released my adult horror debut, Children of Chicago, which is just a genre mash of thriller, crime, and horror. It takes place in Chicago and deals heavily with fairy tales and Chicago history. I'm working on the sequel. Well, it's not a sequel. I'm working on the 2nd book in that universe that we're calling the Chicago Fairy Tale Saga, and a novella. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I put in the chat the link again to watch her talk about her book for Chicago Public Library. Violet, who is braving 1 a.m. to be with us. You are up next.
Yes. Hi, my name is, I go by V Castro. My name is Violet. Yeah, I write horror, erotic horror, science fiction. And I have a new release, Goddess of Filth, from Creature Publishing, that comes out March 30th. It has a starred review I'm very excited about.
It's very good.
And then, yeah, with Flame Tree Press, I have The Queen of the Cicadas, La Reina de las Chicharas, which is based on a hate crime in Texas. And that comes out in June. Currently working on, actually, I have a science fiction novel and a horror novel, The Generational Curses of La Llorona. I'm actually queering to agents. So I'm kind of like lightly writing and just, sending 2 full novels out like Hi. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm working on. But yeah,
Thank
so
you.
thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Larissa, you are up next.
Oh, great. Thank you. My name is Larissa Glasser. My debut novella F4 was published by Eraserhead Press in early 2018. I've used sort of the interval to be working on more of a folk horror direction. Working on The Brightening, which actually takes place mostly in England.
Oh,
Violet, very
when you
inspiring.
come and visit.
I know we're gonna have to visit some fairy mounds actually. And I'm a librarian by day, and the pandemic has affected my work in interesting ways, which can be discussed later. But I've had a few stories, a few short stories anthologized. One with my favorite would be Rituals of Gorgons, which is published in Tragedy Queens from Clash Books, edited by Lisa Cantorell. So that's something to perhaps put on your Goodreads. And yeah, I'm just honored to be included in this group.
Thank you, Larissa. And last but not least, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Reed. I have one novel out, The Bone Weaver's Orchard, and one collection of short stories called Out of Water. I am working on another novel. Well, I'm working on a revise and resubmit on another novel called The Atropine Tree that I'm really excited about because it's super weird. And I'm also working on kind of the prequel and sequel for Bone Weaver. But yeah, pandemic sure puts a wrench in those plans. So I find that I cannot really write at home anymore because I have two kids here virtual learning, and I am also in grad school. And so I plan for little escapes. Like tomorrow I work the Saturday shift at the library. So after we close, I'm gonna stay and keep writing and come home later.
Empty
So
building,
it's
love it.
kind of whenever yeah.
Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. So we want to get a little bit of background into how you came to horror as writers. And we are going to switch up the order. So when did you really decide that you were going to start writing horror? Can you remember like the first scary thing you wrote? We're going to go in a different order. So I'm going to start with Larissa.
Oh dear. Well, I was sort of invited. Oh, thank you. My girlfriend just brought me a ramen, but that'll have to wait. Worth the wait. I was sort of encouraged to, hey, they're doing an AP English sort of audition. Do you want to audition for AP English in high school? And I was like, yeah, well, it's like being invited to the lacrosse team, whatever the hell, I'll do it. So I was actually admitted. I don't know what they were on, but our summer project was to just write, doesn't matter what. So I was a Tolkien nerd at that time. So I ended up sort of doing a Evil Dead Middle Earth kind of hybrid tribute fanfic kind of thing. And I just fell in. That's really all there was to it. And the professor on the first day of class handed my notebook to me and said, I labored. So that was kind of like, I was like, whoa, that's, if that's like, high art to you, then great. It was really just genre trash. So I was just like, if I can get away with this, I think I'm gonna enjoy this a lot more moving forward.
That's so cool. So you had positive reinforcement from a teacher, which is
from a teacher who said they struggled with it because I know it wasn't their cup of tea because we were all Hemingway and stuff.
But they still wanted you to keep going. I mean, that
was the spark, to be honest.
Yeah. That's
so
fantastic.
Like, if I can have some fun with like, fanfic turning into something hopefully better, that was the spark, and that would have been maybe junior year of high school. Before then, I was just a towny metalhead. So
I mean,
you had some influence too.
Alma, what about you? When did you start writing horror?
You know, probably from the very beginning, all my stories had a sort of horror or supernatural, um, you know, tinge to them. I'm sure like every woman on this panel, you know, I grew up a reader, a little kid that just lived at the library and read any book she could get her hands on. But I gravitated at a very early age to like Poe and that sort of thing. So, you know, I probably a little bit more borderline speculative fiction as opposed to outright horror, but there always seemed to be a sort of dark note to my writing. And rather than see a therapist, I just wrote. So, you know, interesting, Larissa, you know, I was thinking about when I went back to grad school, which was in my 40s, and I went into the writing program at Hopkins, which was sort of the same thing, you know, it was supposed to be literary, but the writing submission that I had was the beginnings of the book that would become The Taker, which, while again, it might not be seen as outright horror, it certainly had that sort of dark, fantastical elements to it. And I was surprised too. I mean, I ended up getting in the program based on that submission, but all through it, I sort of felt this, you know, that I was sort of the, you know, redheaded stepchild, because I was writing genre. I wasn't trying to write the all-American novel, but joke's on them. You know, I'm probably one of their most successful recent graduates. So, you know, so there you go, right?
It worked out. Sarah, what about you? Oh, gotta unmute. Sarah, oh, there you go.
I started in 6th grade probably. I had it also, like Larissa, I had a teacher who was encouraging. We had a poetry unit, and so I was writing poetry for class, and people were enjoying my poems, and I got this rush like, okay, I could do this forever. But we then would have more writing where we were doing stories, and I was writing ghost stories, which my teacher didn't like the ghost stories. You know, he was like, okay, all right, if that's what you're gonna write, but he still encouraged me, and I never stopped.
Excellent, since 6th grade. That's awesome. Violet, what about you? When did you start writing horror?
Well, you know, culturally, the oral tradition is very strong. I've always grown up with stories. I've always been told stories by my mother, my aunts, my uncles. Of course, everybody knows La Llorona. You're just like, now if you don't, shut the hell up. She's gonna get you. She's there. La Lechuza, I think I see her in the trees. So from very small, they're just it's just something you grow up with. But when I was really small and my mom sent them to me, I made books myself from paper and with really gruesome drawings. And so I've been doing it since I could not even spell. It's just something I've always loved. And then as I learned to read and could go to the library, it just developed. But I never felt I could do it. I never really had that encouragement. I just did it for the sake of it. And then I kind of reached a personal crisis in my life, and it just happened. I can't explain it any other way. It just happened, and I just said, "Fuck it." Sorry,
No, you can
screw
curse,
it.
it's fine.
I said, "Fuck it," and I'm just gonna go for it, and I haven't stopped.
Well, thank you for that. Nicole, how about you? When did you start writing horror?
So my first love story with horror began when I was like Violet. My mom told me stories about Little Rabbit Foo Foo, and we had stories in our community as well. But when I read Where the Wild Things Are, here's this magical place, right? And Max, who doesn't want to eat his food, but is very, very upset about the dinner, and gets sent to his room. I was Max, right? I was very picky about what I could eat and how much I got of it. And so the fact that he leaves and he goes to where the wild things are, and he becomes king of all the wild things. Like, so I hear these horrible, monstrous creatures that he just takes over and rules them. And so I became very infatuated with that. And of course, I graduated, the older I got, to stories of, you know, Stephen King, Edgar Allan Poe, Shirley Jackson, and the like. And so when I was in high school, it was an English teacher for me also. She's like, "Hey, Nicole, you do lots of writing. We're having this district-wide essay contest. Would you like to, I think you should submit something." And I was like, okay, I don't mind writing. Writing was fine. Math, not so much, but the writing I could do. And so I wrote the essay and didn't think anything else about it. And I won, right? So out of everyone that was in high school in Knox County, I won. You can actually go to the Knoxville News Center and there's my 15-year-old picture. But what was most important was they paid me. I got money for it. And I was like, you guys will pay me to write stuff? What?
And that was the end of that.
Like I knew Stephen King and all these other people I had like, and Toni Morrison and Terry McMillan, they all had like these book deals and stuff. But Nicole, like Violet, I didn't think I could ever do that work, especially with horror and not contemporary women's fiction. And so I actually didn't get my first, I would go home and write my, Stephen King, I'm an 80s kid, 80s slasher film influence stories, right? On my Word Perfect files, but they were just for me. I didn't actually get my first like sale of a horror story until 2006, which was about a demon running, racing cars on the back streets of New Mexico. You can find it in my Weird Western collection, actually. But that was my first like sale of a horror story. But I've been living and breathing horror, and very much like Alma, many of my stories, if they're not firmly set in horror, they have dark overtures and dark beats and elements. And so pretty much my whole life.
That's so great.
Short answer.
No, that's great. Cynthia, you're the last one for this question. When did you start writing horror?
I came to horror later. So I've always watched horror movies I grew up with. Alfred Hitchcock Presents and The Twilight Zone, and every horror movie you can imagine. I rented out like the video store horror films probably 2 or 3 times each. I was a community journalist for a long time. My day job has always been in marketing, but by night I was a journalist. I started working as a community journalist at about 19. And about 28 years old, I just got burned out. I couldn't continue cover. I live in Chicago. I live in inner city Chicago. And so I just came across a case where there was a police involved shooting of a youth, and I was done. I couldn't write the story. I was really shaken up, but I wanted to keep writing. And so I started an MFA in writing, where they were completely confused why I even wanted to be there. I thought, well, maybe I'll do creative nonfiction. And I was 28 years old. There are all these 20-year-olds or 22-year-olds. And I started writing, and my graduate advisor was like, you're a horror writer that doesn't know she's a horror writer. So I felt like I was there's this common theme. Alma said it, that your stories are not fully set in horror. And I feel like that's probably indicative of what I write too. So a lot of what I write is grounded in truth, and I use a lot of folklore with it. So I didn't start writing horror until, I've always been a writer, I've always been a poet, but in terms of like writing actual horror, I came to it later as a way of perhaps initially finding some peace with the stories that I had encountered and being able to come to terms with that.
Thank you for sharing that. I do want to start talking about authors you guys would recommend, but specifically because, as we all know, with Women in Horror Month, people bring up all the dead horror women writers, right? And that's great. I'm happy that, I love Shirley Jackson too, right? Mary Shelley. But I really wanted you guys all to have a chance to sort of talk about one or two current living writing female horror authors that you would that you actively recommend to other people, and why you think their work is important and should be read. Oh, and good. Yes. By the way, people in the chat, start putting yours in too. They're already starting. Thank you. So we're going to start with Sarah. You got to unmute. There you
go. Yeah, definitely Sylvia Moreno Garcia, right? I'm probably going to bring her up a lot in future questions because she's my favorite. But also Gemma Amor and Michelle Renee Lane are two that are really coming out strong with lots of amazing writing. So definitely check both of them out and buy everything that they've written and read it all.
Thank you, Sarah. Violet, your turn.
Yeah, well, I do want to bring up that it is February and it is Black History Month. So, I think we need to, just shout out Black women in genre fiction and horror. Linda Addison, the queen, and Tananarive Due, both of them that are just mind-blowing. And Linda Addison, not only is she an amazing writer, but she does a lot for women in horror, for women of color in horror. She has this amazing heart, this light, and she brings a light to horror beyond the books and the writing. And so I think it's important that read both of these women because they're exceptional talents, masters of what they do and the storytelling, but they're stories that have to be told, that need to be told, that are long overdue to be told. So I would say, shout out to all the Black women, Nicole, who are RJ, Joseph, Jessica Guess, that are writing horror, that are just, telling their stories. So,
I have to say, I am on the record. I say this everywhere I go. I don't think it'll ever be topped. My most proud achievement in life was that I was on the Lifetime Achievement Committee that gave Linda that award. And I don't think I can ever have a better experience.
She's
so
amazing.
She's a wonderful human being. I agree completely too, but all the authors, great. So now everyone else is gonna have to follow Violet. Nicole, why don't you go next since you were mentioned?
All right, so in addition to the women, the amazing writers that Violet listed, I would also like to recommend Dr. Chesia Burke and Simiko Sawson are two Black women horror writers who are writing feminist Black horror. It's kind of pushing and posing good questions around beauty, identity, sexuality, and women in general, what it means to be a woman. So those are two that I think everyone should be reading because they're phenomenal.
Thank you. Cynthia, your turn.
I am going to shout the poets because I'm a poet.
Good, good.
Stephanie Wojtowicz, Sarah Tatlinger, Jessica McHugh, Monique Quintana, who I absolutely adore her
everybody.
All
of this.
And of course, Linda Addison, her poetry. If you haven't read her poetry, Donna Lynch as well. So the poets, all the poets, read these beautiful. I'm just Christina Singh as well. So apologies, but there's just so many. There's a growing group of horror poets, and they're absolutely fantastic.
I'm gonna pause before we get to Larissa. You're gonna be next. Everybody's asking you to put the names of your authors in the chat. So if everyone who's gone already can put your names in the chat, that'd be awesome. People wanted to see them. So Larissa, it's your turn.
Okay, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, and because I really don't consider her to be a genre writer per se, but she has written a genre novella, which really reached me, would be Tori Peters. Now I will spell it in the chat. It's not as in Tori Amos, but
Look, I have her book too.
Oh, there it is. There we got it. Okay, library copy. Torrey Peters, just how she sounds.
I'll write it in.
I was recovering from brain surgery about 5 years ago, and I had sort of given up on life, writing, etc., or anything. I ran across her novella, post-apocalyptic, called "Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones," which is basically The Stand, but with vengeful trans women. It's like it says what it needs to in 1,500 less pages. And it also sort of time trips Tarantino style. And the book that Becky just held up is got a similar approach. It's got a non-linear narrative, which I think is admirable. She sort of says the things for a lot of trans women. It's really like a punch in the gut, but then she gives you a huge hug. And yeah, trust me, everything's gonna be okay. So I wanted to signal boost her, even though I sound like a broken record, because I praise her, I proselytize her rather every chance I get. But I also want to. I never thought I'd live to see other trans women writing in horror. So I'm just gonna. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna name drop. I want to name drop. Haley Piper. I want to name drop Gretchen Felker Martin, who is just a genre trash woman like me. Makes me happy to feel like I belong. And Ava Harms, and Katie Michelle Quinn. And if there's anyone I'm missing, please just rip me a new one later. But these are all important new voices, and its own voices and its queer voices. So that's why those voices gave me hope and made me feel like I belonged again. So
thank you, Larissa. And you're making me miss seeing you in person when you talk. I just get like the way you are. It's just
we're all counting the seconds. We all.
I know, right?
Once things are safer, then it's gonna happen.
Alma, you're the last one to go with this question with some current living authors you want to recommend, female authors.
Hey, yeah, that's, I'm going to also say Tananarive Due, because I think, first of all, she has, pretty extensive list of books that she's written, but I think, we should be admiring her not only for her writing capability, but for the way she's tackled a career. I think a lot of men, get recognition for the longevity of their careers and not necessarily women. Not only has she written a lot of wonderful books, but she's a constant learner. She's a professor. She's gone on to go into screenwriting. She does production of film. I mean, I greatly admire, and I myself am trying to transition also into film and TV, and it's a very difficult thing to do. And she's been kind of a trailblazer in that area. And now she's doing the, is it Afrofutures writing? That's sort of science fiction-y. Just, and she's just a phenomenal person. I had the opportunity to be on the stage with her at Decatur Book Fest early in my career, and she and her husband are both just such wonderful, very generous, heartwarming people. So definitely everyone should already be reading her, but they should be following her. And maybe the second one, I'll be a little controversial because I think this is a little bit, we'll get to it in another question as to sort of where is horror going or what does the future hold. I would say Carolyn Kepnes, who's probably best known for those You books about her serial killer. But, I read her works or I listen to her works on audiobooks, and I think she's part of that group of writers that's sort of the horror adjacent or the, widening tent of horror, that makes you question what really is a horror novel. And she's just such a phenomenal storyteller.
And it's interesting, Alma brought it up. It's brought up multiple times with Tananarive too, being a teacher and a professor. And so she teaches a course on Black horror at UCLA. Yeah. And many of you mentioned MFA teachers who encouraged you to do horror. And I think that there is this change too, that we are seeing that it's getting a little more legitimate. Okay, so now I want to ask some people, all you people, what some of your favorite, some female characters in fiction and movies? They don't have to be horror, but think about yourself and what female characters have inspired you to create or just to be who you are. So let's start with, actually, we'll start with Alma because you went last. Let's go.
Okay. I was afraid you're going to, but a couple of popped to mind when you said that have sort of inspired me. Because I really was one of the weirdest little kids you'd probably ever want to meet. And
I think we all were, Alma, don't worry.
So there's this show that, again, I'm older than most of you too, that I'm sure none of you saw. It was on PBS a long time ago. I was too young to even know what it was really about, but it was about George Sand, the French authoress, who, took women as lovers and, dressed as a man and all this kind of stuff. And I didn't even at that time, like I said, I was very young, didn't really absorb what it was actually about. But I remember being inspired by her as a woman who did what she wanted, didn't let herself be constrained by, what society expected of women at the time. And I'm afraid that probably set the tone for me for the rest of my life. And one other character that was very influential is, and of course the name went right out of my head. Oh, it's Orlando, the Virginia Woolf book, Orlando, which is genre swapping, it's speculative fiction. It spans 400 years. I was just, especially the movie version, Tilda Swinton played the main character in the Sally Potter movie, which is phenomenal. So that has had a huge impact both on my writing and, well, especially my writing. You can see it in The Taker, just sort of where I was going for, what I was going for there.
Thank you, Alma. Let's go to Violet. What female characters that inspire you?
Oh, well, that's easy. Again, being, a young kid, I'm in my 40s, and And so there were not a lot of Latinas in media at all, or Latinas writing horror. But one Latina, well, not really a Latina, the character is Vasquez in Aliens. And I am obsessed with her. And it is my dream, and I'm putting it out there, universe, to write an Alien franchise book with, and it is Latina led, it is Latina hardcore, because even though the actress is not Latina, it was like, look at this woman, look at her. She isn't the typical, long hair. She is not what you are told you should be. And I loved that. And I loved her attitude. I loved everything about her, and I loved the story. And also Alien, Ripley, she's a great character. But being a little Mexican girl and seeing that, I cannot tell you what an impact that has on your soul to see yourself represented, even though she is not a Mexican woman. It is so incredibly important, and that has always stayed with me. um but yeah, it was like, I love it. And another character, but it's not a horror film, and I was way too young to watch this film. There's a movie called Colors. Maria Conchita Alonso plays a woman, and in the day she's working in a fast food restaurant, very sweet. But then, you get a scene of her with this hot pink dress, and she's like, "This is me, man. I'm a homegirl, man." And I just loved these two versions of her, but they were both her, and she accepted both of them, and that was incredibly powerful for me to see. So yeah, I have to say, at a young age, seeing any kind of Latina in media really hit me hard because it was so rare.
Thank you, Violet. Larissa, your turn.
Oh geez. Well, I'm gonna go to the big three first, which would for me would be Ripley, Tank Girl, and oh geez, um, anyone who Ann Magnuson, the actress, ever played in any movie. But for more recently, it sort of struck out at me was Thomasin from The Witch. She is liberated from that horrific situation, and probably the happiest ending I've ever seen in any I don't know, genre movie whatsoever. You need the subtitles because I can't understand. Everyone's mumbling their lines in that movie, but I can't watch that ending enough times. Just her liberation from that horrific family situation. So I would say Thompson from The Witch is my big go-to. Oh, that's who I forgot to mention, Princess Leia Organa, but Thompson she's top of the totem pole for me for inspiration.
Of course, Princess Leia. Cynthia, your turn.
I'm going to try to name a few pretty quickly. So
That's fine.
My first obsession was the character of Nancy in A Nightmare on Elm Street, because to me, I always thought it was completely fascinating that there was this person that if he were alive, she would have been one of his intended victims and intended targets. And so even in death, she still had to fight against him. And so there was this like double horror that I always thought was very strange. And then the fact that then she came back in a new nightmare. She came back in a Dream Warrior in a very like mother figure to protect these children. And that really struck with me, that she didn't escape the situation. She kind of like ran towards it to protect people. And then she came back in a new nightmare as a mother, and I just kind of blew my mind. And so I've always gravitated toward maternal figures. So Margaret White and Carrie, for some reason, she terrified me. She reminded me a lot of my really religious mother. And then Carrie, of course, how she was bullied and she became, to me, I always sympathized with her. And, she was taunted and she was bullied, and I always looked at it as she had to protect herself. Pamela Voorhees, I always sympathized with her, even at a young age. Like, her son died, and so she was mad, and there was this idea of vengeance. And then Amelia and Babadook as well, where we take grief in that film, and grief manifests as a monster. So I've always been very fascinated with women that kind of stand on this line of monster or villain and protagonist. So
Thank you. Nicole, what about you?
So, like Violet, growing up, there weren't a whole lot of positive African American women in cinema. So, I had a non-genre. Well, I fell in love with Nichelle Nichols watching Star Trek with my dad, and so she became kind of like this icon for me and this beam, no pun intended, in terms of like, you can be anything, you can be equal, you can be considered. And then people are like, all she did was answer the phone. But considering that the roles at the time where Black women were maids or prostitutes or playing slavery roles, this was huge. And so answering the phone on a starship in space and being equal to everyone else on the bridge, a senior officer, was incredibly empowering for a very young, speculative fiction lover. So Nichelle Nichols' role in Star Trek was kind of like a fantastic inspiration for me. But as I got older, actually the next thing, again, it's not genre, it's Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale. So
that film.
Oh, but there's like it's the first time I ever saw, but in the Women of Brewster Place, you get to see a lot of different Black women, and it kind of reinforces this idea that Black people are a monolith and that we are lesbians, we are wealthy, we are spurned, we are, middle-aged and seeking love. We were all these things, and it was depicted on film. And so I was kind of inspired by all, because I saw my aunties, I saw myself in various phases of my life. So those two entities, the Women of Brewster's Place and excuse me, The Color Purple, like all these wonderful films just kind of reaffirmed for me where I was in terms of each aspect of my life, and kind of inspired me on to the next one. I think it's interesting too that Angela Bassett is in like a whole bunch of those. Right? So she's like in a whole bunch of, so basically Angela Bassett inspires me. Horror wise, Lovecraft Country's Letty. Oh, actually all the women in Lovecraft Country, all the Black women in Lovecraft Country, I saw pieces of myself in all of them. But Letty truly inspired me because she was, even when she was afraid, right? It was courage is doing the right thing, even when you're scared. And Letty did that often. So she was completely courageous, not defined by what the expectations were. She was Letty motherfucking Lewis, right? So she's who she was. And so and no one was gonna make her shrink. Letty was a flame. Like, I love that about her character. And I love all the women of Lovecraft Country in particular, because they were, I feel like that whole season of Lovecraft Country, it was Misha Green's love letter to Black women.
I led if people are interested for Library Journal, I led a discussion with Matt Ruff and some other people about Lovecraft Country. Gavino Iglesias was on it, a few other people. Oh, Mary San Giovanni. And we talked about the differences, right, in the book and the show, how the women, and Matt Ruff was like, I love that Misha took let
that
the
was
women
the Misha Green
tell
thing.
their
That
story.
wasn't a Matt Ruff thing, right?
And he was, and she was unavailable, but he talked about that. Like that was so great because it's the women having the chance to be the star and to direct the story. And it was, that was great. I love that too. And then Sarah, you're last talking about a female character that inspired you, or more than one.
Well, when I was younger, I wanted to be Anne of Green Gables plus every witch ever.
Wait, like as one person? Wait, as one person or and?
And. But I also identified a lot with like my grandmother introduced me to like Jane Eyre. So I always identified a lot with Jane Eyre, and later then Maricat Blackwood. I guess I was always just kind of unmoored and contrary. So I really identified with these wandering creatures who are angry at everyone. I think that's maybe what it was.
So you wanted to be every witch ever. Did you try to put some spells on people?
Oh, well, of course. Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
I tried until it started working, right?
And anybody else who wants to share characters in the chat, keep going with that. That was great. So now we're going to start talking about horror right now. And so, this is Women in Horror Month, and many more women are writing in the genre. And as you all have brought up, from more diverse backgrounds. It's not just that we're adding more women into the genre, which we are, but we're also adding women from more varied perspectives and backgrounds. So do you think as a whole, not just to your own writing, but this broad diversity, has it brought any new storytelling devices to the horror genre, new themes, new things that you think weren't there before more voices were embraced? So let's start with Nicole, actually.
All right, so I'm looking for my. All right, so do I think what tropes have come up in the are coming up in the genre? Was that the question?
Yeah, so more tropes or different ways we tell stories because we have more diversity, both women and people from different backgrounds.
Yes, I think we have like. So I know we do have a lot more. I think we have different tropes that are developing. We've moved past the Black person dies first, right? Yeah. In horror, but we're definitely coming up with some more things. I want to see horror move beyond like Black tragic pain. So that's kind of one of the things we're kind of like leaning on. But I would like to see us move kind of beyond that. And I would like to see more than latent powers or latent things coming up, right? I didn't know I had this horror, I just want to see more. I'd like to see, we have some diversity, but I'd like to see more diversity in terms of not just there because I need to make it diverse, but I need more diversity telling different stories, right? And so I mentioned earlier that Black folks are the monolith. I think everyone on this panel knows that. But there are so many more stories that could be told that kind of aren't. And so I don't want to, one of the tropes that I keep seeing over and over again is like racism and Black pain and exploring social ills. That's all fine and great. But can we like investigate different social ills, right? Beyond just racism or different social, not that that's not important, don't get me wrong, it completely is. But I would love to see that expanded beyond just like, for example, in Us, in Jordan Peele's Us, it's not because the family's Black that they have this thing happening. It's a horror story that just so happens to have a Black family at its center. And so I would like to see more stories like horror like that, right? Where as opposed to, I enjoyed Get Out. I think Get Out was very valuable, but as opposed to, again, exploring the horrors of racism, I would like to see in conjunction with that, I would like to see it expanded to things like Us, right? Where you have horror unfolding, but the characters just so happen to be Black. And it's not about their race that's the issue, or that is problematic or horrific. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
We're going to go to Sarah. So talking about women and more diverse voices from backgrounds, all that. What's it bringing to the genre that you're excited about?
It's just bringing horror back to life. I feel like horror was stuck in a rut. And I think bringing diversity to the genre is what has made it wonderful again. There was an anthology I edited a few years ago called Gorgon. And what I wanted was a variety of mythologies. They were supposed to be myth-inspired stories of transformation. And we got wonderfully diverse stories for this anthology. And they came from around the world with all these diverse mythologies. And it's just like, I love that book more than my own books because of that, because it has that beautiful world mythology in it, but they're new myths that have never, been told before. So I love that about it. And one of my favorite moments in recent horror is when Silvia Moreno Garcia broke Gothic tropes in Mexican Gothic and just completely turned everything upside down. And by doing that, made it better.
That was what was so great about that book. It turned both the trope around, right, from the British perspective, but also the whole female, the way she attacks the story is different. Yes. We've had lots of female protagonists in Gothic stories, but yeah, I don't want to give it away to people who haven't read it. So, but yeah, thank you. Cynthia, you're next.
So I'm a white Latina. I'm Puerto Rican, but I recognize I have privilege because of I am fair skinned. And in saying that, I was just over here like shouting when Nicole was talking, like, yes, 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 like everything that you said, it's like, yes, I agree. I think that Get Out is an absolute masterpiece. We needed that work. But when I saw Us, I was like practically standing and shouting in the theater because it's a film, it's a horror film, and the leads just happen to be people of color. Now, I don't want to say that we shouldn't be exploring cultural folklore. We should there is always a space for that, for sure. And it is that type of work is important, going back and exploring our historical legends that, like Violet said, a lot of these stories were oral. They were not written down. We don't have books on, the goddess of death. Very few. They're probably more academic type texts. But I want to see those works 100%, but I would also like to see that coupled with works by people of color, works of all diverse backgrounds, LGBTQ. I want to see all of these works where the story is just a story. It is just diverse characters in a cabin in the woods. Like, why can't we see that? That would be amazing. And so, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say, but yes. So everything Nicole said, big exclamation point. And yeah. All right. Thank you.
I think that's a great point you make. I'm gonna call on Violet next because she mentioned she got the star review in book list, which I gave her book. And one of the things I loved about it was, there's these Chicana girls who are embracing their Aztec history. But as a Jewish woman, I loved reading a possession tale that was like outside of Christianity, just taking it back from, it has to be priests and it has to be, there's a priest there, but trust me, we're not on his side. But even like, I'm not a Latino woman, but as a Jewish woman, I was like, yes, I want to see this demonic possession story, not with this Catholic lens. And I loved that. So anyway, what about you, Violet?
Yeah. So, Goddess of Filth, and also Queen of the Cicadas, on both of those books, there are two different goddesses from the Aztec, sorry, it's almost 2 a.m. here.
Yeah.
Aztec mythology. And yeah, I love possession. I love The Exorcist, but it's always that, that girl who's in a dirty white gown tied to a bed, and it's like the devil. But what if you're not inviting the devil in? What if it's some other part of you, and it's part of your history, and it's something good that's needed, that will bring on transformation and change for the better? It just so happens to be really fucking creepy and scary. And again, the girl isn't the horror. The possessor is not the horror. There are other things that are more horrible than that, than young women. And in Queen of the Cicadas, actually, I do visit a hate crime, and I do visit South Texas. And I wanted to visit the Bracero program, which was huge in American history. But we don't talk about that Mexican American history. Chicanos are not really represented anywhere. The Mexican American history is definitely, it's different from Mexican history. Okay, and that's what I wanted to shine a light on, because in Texas, my dad, in the book there is a sign, and it says, and this is real, a real sign. It says, no dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans. And I asked my dad, I said, why don't you speak Spanish? And why didn't you try to teach me Spanish? And he looked at me and he said, well, my dad's from Guadalajara and he remembers having to use a different toilet. So why would he teach me Spanish? And it just made me stop how we had to, as a people, disassociate from our own identities and our history and our culture just to have some worth, to put some value on our existence. And And after American Dirt came out, boy, did I say, I'm writing Queen of the Cicadas.
Good. I have a lot to say about how horrible.
So I did. And
Good.
honestly, not a single agent would take it. But, you know, Don messaged me straight away and he was like, I love this. I want it. And it's coming into the world. And I am so proud of it. And I really,
yeah. Thank you.
So I
And
think
this-
that's important, just to reclaim
This
whatever
leads
you
really
want.
well to Alma, actually, because Black Cranes is a good example. You wrote the introduction to that anthology. And one of the things I think it did so well, I reviewed that also, is that you're very honest in the introduction about how being an Asian woman, right, means so many different things. And so bringing all these voices together is just a great way to introduce those stories. Excuse me. So you can answer this question, but I wanted to make that connection.
Sure, I was hoping to bring up Black Crane, so thanks for mentioning it. I mean, I think that anthology is a good example of how horror's changed, and you know, the great reception that it's got. And just like everyone on this panel has already said, you know, it's the opportunity to tell stories that you know, some of them make a point of the Asianness, some of them don't. And that's kind of the point, like Nicole said, that you can have a story and the protagonist is an Asian woman and, you know, she could have been a white guy, but, you know, she's given the role. So, I mean, I would really encourage people to check that out. But one of the things that struck me that I think everyone here is, and I've kind of noticed it too in reading some books, and I'll talk about My Heart as a Chainsaw, Stephen Graham Jones' latest book, which I just finished. But you know, what really struck me is those of us who are women or were from ethnic or other cultures that have been marginalized and repressed really in you know, civilizations that are dominated by a white Anglo-Saxon tradition. You know what horror is because you've lived it, right? It's this oppression that you can never break through. And, you know, I've had a pretty good life, but I fought very hard to get it. You know, I worked in for the intelligence community, for instance, not at CIA, I wouldn't put this on them, but at another one, which is an extremely technical agency, and it is incredibly misogynistic. Like, it doesn't matter how good you are as a woman, they're only going to let you go so far, and you can beat your head bloody. So every woman knows what real horror is because we have to deal with this in our lives. Every minority knows what this is like, right? And so when you write a story about horrible things that happen, it has this ring of truth in it because you've been there. And it's not, sometimes I have to bite my tongue, this fake made up horror. Ooh, horror, you know. One of the things I was for a long time was a genocide analyst for CIA. So when you've seen thousands of people be slaughtered overnight, it's kind of hard to be scared about the thing in the woods, right? Who maybe is going to kill one farm boy. And that's what I like now. You get so much horror these days that really has that ring of authenticity, right? That there are things that we should be afraid of in this world. And it's not necessarily the things that, you know, that we were afraid of in 50s horror movies. Stephen Graham Jones' latest book is really interesting, not to take us off on a tangent, but what I find interesting about, have you read it, Becky?
I have to wait to read it because my review is not due yet. It's sitting here taunting me.
Oh, okay. So the main character is a woman. It's a young woman. I think she's 17 or 18. She's half Native American. And, you know, she is the underdog. She's the underdog's underdog. And, you know, you might think, oh, a guy's writing that book. But he did such an amazing job with that protagonist. He really knows how to make people, you know, he writes a poignant character, I think, better than anybody else, right? So and it makes an argument for, you know, you can represent the other, something that you're not, as long as you're very, you know, sort of aware about what you're doing and you know what you're trying to bring to the story. Gosh, there's so much we could talk to on the subject, because one of the other things to kind of get away from diversity, but it's a diversity of another kind. As I really do feel just in the few years that I've been, embraced by the horror community, which has been wonderful. I never thought that would happen, quite frankly, after my first 3 books. But is I've just seen what's considered horror really widening, that it's not just, it used to be in the old days, they'd think it was either like a slasher film or it had to have, a supernatural character like a ghost or a werewolf or something. And now it's really broadening, because what's scary to people, it's, there's a wide range of what's scary to people. It's not just these very narrow things. And as long as that's what you're doing in a story, you're writing horror. I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that.
So, and I'm going to move on to Larissa next, because I think that's a great segue to her, because she's the last one to answer this, because what you write also does push the boundaries of what is horror too, Larissa. So what do you feel like has been brought to horror by adding all these new voices to it?
I think reclamation, actually, of the fun stuff. I mean, I think when I first met Violet at StokerCon, we both bonded over how badass Vasquez is in Alien.
Yes.
And see, that's the thing. I mean, I want to get into more slow horror as I hopefully progress as a writer, but I'm also a genre trash person. So, for instance, I mean, Gretchen Felker Martin has a book coming out from Torn Nightfire next spring, a year from now, basically, called Manhunt, which is basically post-apocalyptic trans women fighting off berserkers with, they're fighting off with a paramilitary force, essentially. So it's the reclamation of like all the, silly things like Commando or like Total Recall or something. Reclamation from us, taking the fun stuff and reclaiming it so that it's no longer owned by, we're not going to go there, but
well, no, but that's a great point.
I mean,
because
the cis white,
Right.
guys or whatever is like, have some fun and take back the fun. Make it.
I think
your
that's
own.
what I love about F4 so much, is how
Yes.
much fun your novella is. It's like takes all that stuff and reclaims it, and is just
It was
fun.
it was a desperate fever dream. I was like, I want Godzilla to like, be cool again or something.
It was great. Now, we are getting close to the end of time, and I'm going to let Larissa go first, and she went last. But I want to combine our sort of last 2 questions so we don't keep people too long. So the last 2 questions we want to talk about was sort of the changes you've seen in your time in the horror industry. All of you've kind of hinted to it, but also what you hope to see now that you've seen some change as a woman in horror. So what you've seen get better for you as a woman in horror, and then what you hope will come in the coming years. So Larissa.
I didn't think I was going to live to see it happen. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm a upper middle class raised white trans woman, but I literally thought I was going to be murdered before I'd hit age 30, and I'm on the cusp of 50 now. So I didn't think I'd live to see this happen, and now that it's happening, I'm pretty stoked, because it's like the clouds are parting bit by bit. And with that said, there's also pushback, which I also found very interesting, because, as a Tolkien nerd, there's always the enemy to fight against, and I don't want to make a false equivalency with, the far right, but, it's just going to be an ongoing battle. But what I would say that encourages me is that everyone's going to be sticking to their guns. And for the most part, a lot of the pushback is just seen as super lame now by the people who matter, I think.
Yeah,
I'm not talking so much about public policy, but general attitude, like, whether it's, the sad puppies or whatever the hell that was. They're fading further into obscurity. by their own devices. So let's just let them sabotage themselves. That's kind of where I'm at. I don't want to be super like Pollyanna-ish about it, but let them destroy themselves is what I'm saying.
I like that, Larissa. That's a good positive way to look at it. So, Sarah, what about you? What changes have you seen, and what do you hope to see as more change comes as a woman in horror?
I've definitely seen more awareness and more effort, just in general from the horror community itself. Every year at the end of the year, I always kind of get ready for this wave of, oh, my best reads of the year stacks. And it's just like, white dude, white dude, white dude. But I haven't seen as many of those in the last 2 years anyway. And so it's been encouraging. I'm seeing more people choosing to read widely and examining their own habits and their own perspectives. And I see consciousness of reading choices. And I think that's really encouraging. And I think it will keep us moving in the same direction or in a better direction. But there's still a long way to go, right? I think women in horror have, the whole movement has done a lot to lift up women in horror, but it hasn't always been a very intersectional movement. And it needs a lot of work in that area, like a lot. So that's what I want to see. I want to see it becoming more of an intersectional movement.
Thank you, Sarah. Nicole, what about you? The changes you've seen and what you hope to see from the genre in the coming years. Oh, unmute.
What Sarah said +1. I mean, think about that, right? So I would like to see, what I have seen is that I like to call the Highlander theory for Black horror writers. There can be only one. When you see list of awesome female writers, it's always standing in a dude. That's your one Black, and that's it. Everybody else is white woman, right? So, or they're dead.
Dead.
So it's
dead, white, Black.
Right. So what I would like to see going forward, and where I am very encouraged to see, and with anthologies like Cigarette's Daughters, and even my anthology, which was Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir, I like seeing the inclusivity that's happening in horror. I like the idea of the horror diversity grants, which is actually an active, it's not just performative, it's actually action put behind. We want to encourage and continue to put forth opportunities for people of color and diverse peoples to write horror. And it's not something we're just putting on our tagline, it's something we're actively doing. And so that is, I'd like to see more of that. I'm very happy that has come along. And much like what Sarah said, there's some work that still needs to be done. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But I am encouraged by the actions that I've seen the Horror Writers Association doing. And I am encouraged by what I see in terms of people just tagging me on Twitter saying, hey, I read your stuff. Didn't even know you were out there, but saw you on here, saw this and that, was referred to you by someone else, which means that those conversations are going beyond, I'm just reading dead white horror authors, or I'm just reading Stephen King, right? So I'm reading women now, I'm not just reading Stephen King. So I'm encouraged by that. And so I think going forward, I do believe, like what Larissa said, we'll continue to see the embracing of inclusivity and diversity in horror and opportunity. I would like to see more editors and people that are in like publishing companies, actually acquisition editors. I'd like to see the people who are the gatekeepers in horror be people of color. And so it's great that there are so many authors, but many of us are self-published or independently published or small press published. I would like to see larger groups, kind of larger mid-list publishers start embracing that as well. Those people behind the scenes, editors, and gatekeepers, etc.
And that came up in the chat, and that's an excellent point, because that's when, that's when you were talking and you were making people say it. So thank you. That's when the diversity will really trickle around. So Alma, how about you?
Well, one of the things I would love to see happen is, I do think that, with what we're seeing with TV and movies, streaming services have made horror very popular. But why can't we get those people to then try to crack open a book, a horror book? If maybe collectively we can kind of work on this, do a lot of social media to say, if you liked The Haunting of Bly Manor, you'll really like,
So
something.
Sarah and I know that we do this at the library every day. We try to piggyback off of it, but it's hard.
It's
Yeah.
very hard. I write books that are like the last two books, both The Deep and The Hunger, are about actual historical events. This could not get more romantic and gothic, right? It's love stories, love ghost story on the Titanic. And yet, when I say that part, Titanic, love, people are like, ooh, sounds like my cup of tea. And they go, oh, but it's horror. I don't read horror. Well, give it a try. You never know. And there's so many horror books that if you like these shows on TV, guess what? You're going to love it. They just can't get that, oh, horror is, slasher films and whatever. So we've all got to put on our thinking caps and try to think of ways to capitalize on this horror moment that TV and movies are having and drag some of those people kicking and screaming over to read.
And that's a good point you bring up, Alma. And your books are a good gateway for people. Like I give them this and I say, this, read this. I don't mention the horror too much. And then they're like, oh, I really like this. And then you can give them more, right? And
Thank you.
Yeah. Sylvia Moreno Garcia and I worked on Summer Scares together, and we've done some press together. And I always talk about how readers love her book. She's been a library bestseller for a couple of years. She's finally a real bestseller. But, and we just use people to we say well, you liked this, so try this. And we give out all your titles. And I think it's the women we're talking about, the changes. The female voices are the ones leading. We talked about Lovecraft Country, female driven, right? The Behind Her Eyes right now, the Sarah Pineborough, women driven. Alma's doing work with her stories, for media. It's important. Cynthia, because we're going to be finishing up. What is the changes you've seen, and what do you hope's coming in horror?
I write a lot of notes because mom brain. Yeah. So of course we've seen a lot of diversity. I of course would like to see a wider range of diversity, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia has talked a lot about this, and I feel like she's kind of taken on this platform also about reader perception and reader expectation of diverse works. If you're coming to a horror work written by a female horror writer who's of color, who's writing a female protagonist, your expectation might be something that's grounded in perhaps a white male writer because that's all you've ever read. So I think that there needs to be an openness and understanding that these are probably stories that you have never read before. I'm a Puerto Rican woman in the west side of Chicago who's first generation raised on the mainland. I can guarantee you've never read a horror writer like me, because it's this idea of this expectation. And another thing I would like to see is that not all of our stories are grounded in pain because we are people of color. I think that there's this expectation, if you don't see the character kind of wallowing and in the sense of grief and then finding redemption at the end, then it's wrong. So ask yourself, what is wrong and what is right? And where are those perceptions coming from? And that what Alma said that I really enjoyed is that horror, me personally, I'm not scared of monster stories. I'm scared of people. And so I would like to see more horror by diverse groups that's a little more terrifying, that's probably grounded in some truth and in some reality. I'm sorry to all the monster and the cosmic horror people, but for me, I also write true crime. And so those are the types of things that I'm just wildly fascinated about. And I think that, experimentation and form and genre. I'm a huge experimenter in genre, form. I love embedding nonfiction. I love, I had mentioned Monique Quintana. Her voice is very unique and very different. And so it's this also expectation. When you're sitting down to read a person of color and their work, be open to what you're reading. It's probably something you haven't read before. Thank you, everybody.
And before we get to Violet, and I did you last on purpose since you had to stay up the longest. That would be some horror. But I think your point too, Cynthia, is really well taken, because most people know Mexican Gothic. And going to Nicole's point about not being about the pain, I loved about that book that the protagonist is a wealthy, upper class Mexican woman. She's not, this is not about her pain. She's going to save her cousin who's in a bad marriage. It is not about, you know, oh, woe is her. She is clearly not woe is her. She had to leave a fancy party to go be bothered to go save her cousin. And I think it's one of the reasons it resonated with people, right? Because it wasn't relying on that pain like Nicole was talking about. So we're going to end up with Violet to talk about what she hopes to see, and then let her go to bed.
I'm wide awake now. No, I think everybody made great points. You know, back to what Nicole said. You know, yeah, there can only be one. There can only be one Latina. There can only be one Mexican. There can only be one Puerto Rican. There can only be, and it's like, that is not true. We all have, like I said, the Mexican American experience is different from the Puerto Rican experience. It's different from the Afro-Latina experience. Afro-Latinas are part of both communities, you know, their voices are very unique. So yeah, we need to really embrace these different stories. And like Sina said, be open-minded about what you're reading, because it's going to be different. And also what came up is opportunity. So yeah, you know, what people of color, what women need are the opportunities. You know, it's because it is, you know, great. Oh, we like this book. Okay. But sharing it, you know, events like this, where you are actually giving women a platform, a real platform, but also those higher opportunities, like, you know, as I was, you know, Larissa and I were bonded over, you know, the franchises. You know, let women of color write these franchises. Let the women of color, you know, let's have a Black woman write an entire thing about Storm. You know, I mean, let's, you know, I want to write Vasquez. You know,
Do it.
let's open these doors. Let's, you know, because also, you know, wider doors, wider audience.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to get a wider audience. You know, don't come in with a preconceived notion that like, oh, there's only this audience that spends money and reads this. No, I've been consuming white media since I was a child because I had no choice. I have a choice now. People have choices. So, you know, let's do this.
I like how everyone's bringing up also, yeah, that's a great way to end it, that, you know, there doesn't have to be just one. And Nicole mentioned her anthology, you know, Slay, and Alma, we mentioned Black Cranes. And I know that Cynthia's worked on some anthologies
Latinx Screams.
So, you know, and Larissa has been in a lot of anthologies. And it's important to know that the more we put those out, Nicole even mentioned, like, somebody pointed a reader said someone pointed me to you and they saw you, and then hopefully they read your anthology and see more voices. And I think that's what we're trying to get to here, is to say we're doing well, we're here, we have great stories to read, let's just keep going, right?
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody, especially Violet, it's so late, but everybody for coming, for giving our time, for looking at the questions ahead of time so you could have thoughtful answers, and for being present. Thank you so much. And I want to also point out that every single one of these people gives back to the HWA too. They're not just, you know, authors. They've all done things to help. They've served on committees. They're out there supporting their works for us. And we really appreciate that. As a board member, I want to also personally thank all of you for the time you give.
Can we
so
thank you?
Thank
You are so forward-leaning and so supportive of all of us. And you do such a great job on the board. So thank you very much for
thank you. And thanks
this.
everybody for coming. And there's still a few days left of Women in Horror Month. So
yay!
And then keep reading after. Bye everyone.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Support. Solidarity.